Okay, welcome everyone. I'm continuing to let people in as we get going. My name's Edward Nixon. I'm on the board of the Waterfront for All. It's my pleasure once again to host our speaker series. This is officially our 17th speaker series, and as I was just chatting with Ron a minute ago, we've probably done actually closer to 2 dozen events in the last few years, and it's thrilling to have so many of you with us once again. And for new people who are joining us, please welcome. Um, And if you have a mic on now, I would appreciate it if you could mute yourself. I do hear something in the background. Thank you very, very much for that. Um, of course, so I'm just going to start, as we always do, with a land acknowledgement. But of course, this is Truth and this is the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, and I will have a couple of words to say about that in a minute. We acknowledge we are meeting on the land that is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And on National Truth and Reconciliation Day, something that I feel very grateful and humbled to speak to on our behalf, on the Waterfront for All's behalf, particularly as my long dead father used to remind me that though our family in particular goes back 4 centuries in North America to the foundings of early days of Nouvelle France and the Massachusetts Bay Colony, that we were indeed settlers in a land that you know had been inhabited for millennia by its original people that I was privileged growing up on the West Coast to spend a great deal of time with my Coast Salish friends. Uh, and in particular in Toronto, we know that the waterfront, even though it's been altered over the centuries, as we know, quite extensively, the water and the riverways were absolutely central to the commerce and health and well-being of many of the aforementioned indigenous peoples who were here for thousands of years. And it is in particular, I think, for us to think on that and keep that in mind. And I believe that in caring for our waterfront, for making it something that is accessible to all, that honors the original inhabitants of this land and welcomes all the newer inhabitants of this land, is something I think that we are privileged and honored to try to carry on. And it's a way of, I think, a small way of, acknowledging and paying tribute to the inheritance that we are grateful to have. Thank you very much for coming. And I will just give you a quick heads up as to how we're going to proceed. Um, Now, this is something today. I will say that our chair, Ed Hoare, who, as those of you who know him know, he's an avid kayaker, as I think some of you are. And the issue of the quality of our dock walls and the sort of built environment of our harbor, especially our central waterfront, has been something that's been he's been passionately concerned about. And we're thrilled to see the city is getting engaged in this, and that uh, Jennifer and Merrillees are here with us this evening to talk more about that. But how we're going to start is in a moment, I'm going to hand it over to Ed, and I'm going to load up your pictures in a second, Ed. And Ed's just going to give us a bit of a sit rep and sort of just talk to how we sort of got here and how he persuaded us, those of us who may not kayak around the Central Waterfront, that it was in fact an issue that we needed to talk about and that it was worth discussing. And then I'm going to, after Ed talks, I'll hand it over to Ron. Ron will introduce our speakers from the City of Toronto, and then they will do their presentations, and we will take questions. Now, you feel free to comment in the chat as we go, but we'll formally do questions from the chat after all the presentations are completed. And if there is time or or if it's feasible, we may have time for some direct live Q&A. We'll see how it goes. Um, all right, so Ed, I will queue up. I'm going to spotlight you, and I'm going to queue up your deck here.
Are you gonna push the next, or do I do that? Or
Yeah, I will push the
you
next.
will push the
I'll
next.
be the guy who pushes the next. That's the
Okay,
guy I'm going to be.
already good. It's not a lot of slides. In fact, they're just photographs that I took. I just thought I would um, just start off on a kind of a personal note. I've been out, as Edward said, on the water, paddling around in my kayak for, I don't know, 20 years or something like that. It's sort of how I relax, I guess. More fun than being on a treadmill or jogging, in my opinion. So I just get it and I kind of poke around a lot. And so first slide, um, it sort of became obvious to me a long time ago that the dock walls and the breakwaters and everything were kind of in remarkably bad shape. And I became curious as to why that was. Um, so I just thought I'd talk about that a little bit and just sort of show some pictures of this. This is Eric Orgard, who is the head instructor at Harborfront Canoe and Kayak, who's sort of a buddy of mine. This is last night. We actually went over past out the Western Gap out by the National Yacht Club, and I took this picture of Eric by the breakwater out there. You can see that it's in not great shape. All the rebar is showing. I will find out more from Merrillees and Jennifer, but my understanding is that that dock wall's been sitting there for more than 100 years. Nothing probably has ever been done to fix it, so it's obviously kind of falling apart and in danger, as I understand it, of kind of very serious collapse, which would mean in the end that there would be a lot of wave and sort of erosion action all of a sudden on the shore. Next picture, um, just a little bit more of that same stretch. So you can see it's pretty bad shape. Let's go to the next one. So this is another stretch that this is out at the Eastern Gap. So it's Ward's Island. Those people are walking on Ward's Island. I'm sitting in the gap, and we're looking at the stretch of Dockwall there, which has been it kind of collapsed like that, I'd say about 2 or 3 years ago, maybe. So obviously it's not good. People walk by it. There's no railing. It's pretty obviously dangerous. There's a long bit that sort of extends north towards the city that was removed approximately 5 years ago because it was seriously falling to bits. So it was taken out as a kind of a peril to boating, but obviously, that's looking pretty bad. It's kind of shocking. Next slide. It's just another view of the same thing. If you compare the two pictures, I think you see that stuff is actually collapsing more. It's kind of in motion, and eventually that whole thing will fall down. I think. Hopefully not with anybody on it, but you never know. There's kids and bikes and people going on that all the time. Next picture. This is from the island side, the same spot basically. Next picture. Obviously not too great. This is a kind of an issue that I've been concerned about, is that this is the Western Gap, so it's kind of right near the airport ferry, and this is typical of all the safety ladders along there. Some have been fixed. A lot of them are obviously in very bad shape. I think if you were in the water and you tried to crawl out there, you would obviously have a problem. I suspect that ladder is not in fact a fix. There might be one screw holding it on or something like that, and there's a whole series of them. The dock wall itself is obviously not in good shape. It's a concern because a lot of people walk along there as well. There's no railing. It's very icy in winter. I have actually myself pulled a guy out of the water here who was kind of doing the blub blub because I think he had taken a dive into the water. Maybe not a good idea, but there he was, and it turned out that he couldn't climb up near the airport ferry. And I think that if it hadn't just by chance I happened to be going by, if I hadn't been pulled him out, I think probably he would have drowned. And I would expect that that's a situation. You can imagine situations where all kinds of people, for whatever reason, sometimes not praiseworthy reasons, but they end up in the water. The water is cold enough to kill you in a few minutes, probably about half the year. in Toronto. So it's a concern. A part of this dock wall did completely collapse approximately 5 years over by the National Yacht Club, and this part looks like it might come down also. Next slide. This is a dock wall over by, I think it's over by the fire station. And here you can see the dock wall looks like it's not in bad shape, but you can also see that it's sort of a sheer drop. The distance down will depend upon the water level, which will fluctuate. It's quite low now because it's late in the season. But you can see that if somebody's with a skateboard, or they're goofing around, or they're drunk, or they get thrown, by assailants into the water, which I have seen also happen. I had to pull a guy out once. That happened too. Then you're not going to be able to scale up that, obviously. So that's just another issue. It's just pedestrians. You get more people down the waterfront. That's a good thing. But more people means more stuff is going to happen. Next picture. This is an example of a situation I think is pretty good. Jennifer, I think, will be able to talk to us because she worked for Waterfront Toronto. So this is a ladder on Minising Island. It's right at the Keating Channel. So you can see that you got a good sturdy ladder. It's painted yellow. It's protected by kind of wooden protectors. The dock wall itself has obviously been put in pretty recently because that's all new construction there. So it's not all a bad situation. Some of it's actually pretty good, but it does vary a lot. Next picture. I'd been grousing about all this for a while. And at some point, maybe a year ago or a little bit more, I think it was actually Tom in Ozma Malik's office said, well, where exactly are the problems? So I thought that was probably a good question. So I did this sort of very informal dock wall audit saying, I don't have any expertise. I'm not a coastal engineer, I'm not a structural engineer. I don't know anything about that. I'm not a safety expert, but this is just my sort of sense, just from looking around, of the kind of problems that there are. So I wrote this kind of audit saying, here's where I think there are problems, and having an appendix of essentially all of the dock walls in the inner harbor. I didn't do the kind of the area out at Humber Bay, outside the Western Gap or anything like that, just because this is the stuff I guess I see more. And I submitted it. Possibly it's played some role in drawing attention to the problem. I don't know. At any rate, if you want to look at that, it's on our website under documents, and there it is. So here we are. I am delighted to have, I've been enormously impressed with Merrillees when I've spoken to her about this, at the amount of attention and the sort of careful thought about all of these problems. There's issues, of course, about who owns what level of government's responsible for what. There's a bunch of
David
reasons.
Milford speaking. You just called me about a prescription that just arrived. The elevator.
Sorry. So there's problems about who owns what. It's difficult to figure out. Sometimes it seems to be unclear who actually built particular dock walls and particular breakwaters. So that's my personal take on it, and I'm really thrilled to have Merrillees and Jennifer here to tell us all about what the city's doing. And I'm really glad that the city seems to be now moving to kind of try to fix this up. Ron.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to go over to Ron. Just let me. Thanks, Ed.
Ron, I'll introduce our special guest.
I just have to do a couple of things here.
Okay.
I'm going to. There we go. Spotlight you. Ron, do you want to introduce our guests?
Sure. So, yes, we're very happy to have two very knowledgeable people speaking on this topic tonight. The first is Merrillees Willemse, I think is probably the best pronunciation I can give it. She's working for the City of Toronto in the Waterfront Secretariat as a project manager. And so she's coordinating, as far as I can understand it, the application of resources and people to the tasks of managing dock walls and breakwaters. I'll let you read the fine print there, but I think that probably describes her accurately enough. The second is Jennifer Ogrodnick, and she is working at the level of a professional engineer for Create TO, and she is the director of construction. So she is dealing with the nitty-gritty of the projects. I think when she talks about nitty-gritty, she probably calls it riprap, but it's one or the other. So she has a specific training in coastal engineering, as you can see in her biography. Is the biography shared? No, I don't see it shared. Okay, anyway,
It will be on our website.
okay.
It will be shared
yes.
on our website
So
for
she
people who
holds a
want to see
Master
it.
of Science in Coastal Engineering from the Technical University of Denmark and a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from Queen's University. And both Merrillees and Jennifer are very engaged with the current tasks from the city's point of view on breakwalls and dock walls, breakwaters and dock walls. Okay,
Thank you, Ron. Thanks very much, Ron. So, Merrillees, I believe you're going first, if I'm correct,
Great. Yeah.
as we discussed. Okay, so I'll just spotlight you and you can share
Great.
whatever you would like to share. Thank you.
Okay. Well, first, I just wanted to say thank you and thanks for the introduction and setting the stage there, Ed. I appreciate it. And yes, your informal audits have definitely made a big difference in communicating what's really going on and the importance. I'll get to that as well. And I think it's actually quite appropriate that on the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, we're talking about where the water meets the land and our relationship with how we've changed and modified the shoreline and what that responsibilities, what comes with that, and how we think about it going forward. So I'm looking forward to the conversation to go forward. The other thing I just wanted to note is I sit, for folks kind of just to understand my role, I sit within the Waterfront Secretariat of the city within city planning. I'm sure many of you are familiar with some of the key folks in that group, but our job is really to be the conductors, orchestrators of all the different characters and players and needs and ideas that happen and occur along the waterfront, particularly focused on the central waterfront. But that mandate is growing to be more broad than just the central waterfront. And I'll talk a little bit about that because it is relevant to the dock walls and breakwaters. So I think really where the meat of things is what's happening. So, you know, I came into this role about 3 years ago, and I will be honest, being thrown into the dock walls and breakwaters work was all encompassing. There's a lot of a lot to understand, not just in terms of the quantity of the assets, for which we have a significant linear kilometers along the waterfront, but also the varying conditions of them, the various divisions within the city that work, that have an interest in them or that they support, whether it's parks or corporate real estate or economic development, things like this, that kind of wrapping your head around all the various players and all of these assets. But really, it's been about bringing the right people together for a broader dock wall strategy. So I think one of the things that's really important to acknowledge is that there actually has been a lot done on dock walls in the central waterfront in particular, as well as a variety of naturalized shoreline works across the Toronto waterfront. But they've been in pieces and they've been very specific to project efforts as those projects have come forward and as we've been able to fund them. And the dock walls become kind of part and parcel of something bigger in many cases. And so sometimes we don't see all of that as a cumulative effort. And so what we are trying to do is bring everyone together with a broader dock wall strategy. And the focus areas are, as I note here, kind of the central waterfront. So many folks are familiar with that. That's that inner harbor area, Toronto Islands, into the inner harbor for the city. A large effort to get all of this moving and continues to be an important role is Waterfront Toronto as leaders within the central waterfront for the redevelopment and revitalization of the waterfront. They chair the Marine Coordination Committee, which is made up of City of Toronto staff, Waterfront Toronto, Ports Toronto, Toronto Region Conservation Authority, Harborfront Center and Create TO. So bringing folks together around the marine use strategy. I'll talk a little bit about that, but also just around the interests that Dockwalls and the roles that Dockwalls play in having a vibrant and active marine recreational environment, as well as a marine economy. The Portlands, we kind of consider the Portlands, it's the broader extension to the east of the central waterfront. And then we have the western waterfront, which is essentially Ontario Place to High Park, or actually to the Humber River outlet. And then our recent direction in all of this work is to think more broadly across the entire waterfront for the city of Toronto, for the whole municipality. And we're now kind of getting into quite a bit of momentum, and a lot of that has to do with the interest that has come behind the efforts and the issues and the failures, critical areas of Dockwalls across the waterfront. So for those of you who aren't familiar, I have a link in the slides, and I'm not sure if the slides are I can share them so that they can be posted, but if you're not familiar, we do have the 2020 Marine Use Strategy, and that was what I was referring to. Waterfront Toronto kind of chaired this, but with all of the partners that I mentioned, to bring forward a big vision for a marine use strategy, and that does speak to the need to address dock walls. The other area of momentum, as I noted, is for critical locations, stakeholder and political interest has really played an important role. So, the Eastern Gap is an excellent example of this. When I started, Ed's pictures and others in the community, some of whom may be on this meeting, reached me through the councillors, through Deputy Mayor Malik's office. And we used those to ignite deeper and more meaningful conversations with the federal government about that Eastern Gap seawall. I can speak to that if there's more questions, but ultimately it's been a 2-year process of going back and forth with the federal government, particularly Transport Canada, on the responsibility and ownership of that asset. And this includes, I explained to Ed in earlier conversations, but these can be really challenging conversations with long histories that require legal analysis around, ownership and transfers and things like this. And so all of that work was undertaken, and ultimately we finally do have acknowledgement from the federal government that it's their asset and that they are now working with Ports Toronto to address it. We don't have a plan yet, and people have questions. I think right now they're just getting into the state of understanding the need for it to be addressed, particularly it kind of has two roles. It's not just the fact that we need to protect that edge of Wards Island and the public realm and the access and the safety there, but it also protects and preserves the ship channel, which is a federal interest for all of our goods and shipping. And then the other thing is, folks may not be familiar, and I won't spend time on this much, but there is a city asset or it's actually corporate asset management plan for the city. And we have required reporting to the province. The asset management plan, in the last 2 years, has been actually quite helpful in building the momentum behind the interest in addressing dock walls and breakwaters. Because one of the things we have to do in this asset management plan is that we have to inventory and cost all of our assets. And this is not just big things like properties and buildings, but it comes all the way down to like the number of laptops the city owns and things like that. Excuse me. And in that, one of the things that stands out is the condition of the dock walls, because we have to inventory them, identify their condition, and identify the cost to bring them up to a preferred or proposed level of condition or a level of service that we would want them to be in. And so this has helped build the conversation politically. Apologies. So as I said, there's complicated ownership and responsibility here and a long history. So Ed pointed this out in the opening remarks. Many of these assets are over 100 years old. The federal, provincial, and municipal governments at various times in history have had different roles in either constructing, maintaining, rehabilitating both dock walls and breakwaters. And these roles have changed over the course of a more than 100-year history. I do want to clarify, and these images do help. A breakwater is a structure that sits out from the land and protects the shoreline. It has, Ed pointed out, there's water on both sides of the structure. And these are shoreline protection assets. They also provide flat water, paddling courses, etc. A dock wall secures the land. So it is attached to the land and is what keeps the land in its shape and at its condition. So, today, when we are trying to figure out what to do and how to address a dock wall or a breakwater, we have to look at the original construction of the structure, the property and water lot, the stewardship of the parcels, land transfers, the history. Sometimes there's lease agreements that I can give an example. We have a situation just recently where we know we have an issue with a very specific dock wall. It's at risk. We thought we owned it. We dove in, legal services dove in, and we realized we signed a lease agreement with the owner in the 1950s. And so we don't actually own it. And these are the kind of things that are so challenging. And one of the reasons it takes time to address these assets, this history bubbles up through our research. And then we need to kind of focus on new conversations to get us to a place where we can start to address the asset. The other thing that can be a challenge is that the priorities for improvements vary across different divisions, departments, and ministries. This is really important. We don't have, and this would be no surprise, we don't have the capital to go and just repair and all of the dock walls across the waterfront. That would be, over $1 billion of effort to do all of that work in one go. So we have to figure out what the priorities are and what the opportunities are as well. In some locations, a really good example is the East Bay front, for folks who are aware of the area kind of between Jarvis and Parliament, south of Queens Quay. All of that dock wall has been replaced in a bigger effort to redevelop all of that land. So we've got new parks, we've got new developments, we've got institutions, George Brown College is there, et cetera. And the dock wall has been a component of that work, including the expansion of the Water's Edge Promenade. So some of the priorities come through bigger picture conversations that aren't just about the dock wall rehabilitation itself. And these are just some of the interesting images that I wanted to show you about these structures going in over time, and how they were constructed. So one of the big things that I've been involved in the last few years, and Waterfront Toronto has been a huge help in developing this mapping, is to map the assets, getting people to understand the scale of these assets and what we know about them. There's a big giant draft mark there, if you can notice. This is all preliminary information because, as I said, when we actually go in and start to address one specific location, new information can come forward, and then we have to update all of our asset mapping. But this is a very good start, and it allows us to enter into the conversations that we need to have. So this is the Central Waterfront in Portland, and it shows you general information that we have to date on ownership and leases. So LTL represents a long-term lease, and STL is the short-term lease, where there might be a short-term lease activity. There are some disputed locations around ownership that we have marked in black that we're still working through because the nature of, again, these legal investigations hasn't come to a resolution yet. But as we get those, again, we continue to update the figures. We also have a figure that we keep in our work that identifies what has been replaced and what has not been replaced or reinforced. And I should clarify, sometimes it's a maintenance effort and sometimes it's a full rehabilitation and it's a replacement. It does depend, and Jennifer will get into kind of some of the options that we look at when we have the opportunity to redo some of these dock walls and fix some of what's going wrong. The Western beaches, this is the ownership map for the Western beaches, breakwaters. as some folks may know, this is a very hot current focus amongst council, with efforts underway right now to confirm the ownership. It is the city's, based on the city's research, we have identified that the majority of the asset is owned, of the breakwaters are owned by the federal government, but they need to do their research as well. And so they have resources now dedicated to looking into this as well. And we are in the process of leading a condition assessment to look at what the needs are of the breakwaters here. We know that only about 400 meters of the breakwaters have been, 600 meters have been reinforced. And so part of that was for the International Dragon Boat race course that was put in 2006. And the rest has not had much work, unless it's just been shoring for areas that have had failure, and the shoring happens kind of immediately to address some of those issues. So all of this effort has led to a report that went forward to council this past June. We were focused on key actions for the Western Beaches breakwaters to address their condition, ownership, and start discussions with the other levels of government. But it also put forward an overview of the broader work program and needs for Dockwalls, and the need to have a coordinated management program. So as I said, we've been going and addressing Dockwalls and breakwaters on a piece by piece, segment by segment, based on projects, based on funding, based on needs, based on alignment of various stakeholders and political priorities, et cetera. And so the recommendation that came forward is we need a bigger, broader management program that looks at the condition of all of these assets, and comes forward with an ongoing annual management and monitoring program that allows us to understand how we're going to keep these in a state of good repair. And in that, the recommendation of the report was to have Creatio lead as the Dockwall managers for the city and help us coordinate all of these players to move things forward. So before I pass it over to Jennifer, she'll walk through what Creatio is now doing to do this. I just want to point out a few things. One is socializing the scale of this work has been one of the things that I've had to do over the course of the last few years. Politically, getting advocates to understand and partners to understand how much has to be done, and to think through how we might be able to tackle all of this has been part of the job. And right now, where we have critical locations, we are focused on trying to find ways to address those, both funding, but also partnerships and opportunities for the rehab plans. These, as I already noted, the Eastern Gap is a core focus, the Western Beaches breakwaters, the Keating Channel, particularly on north and south side, but also the Keating Channel because it needs to be dredged to support the flood protection work that has been done down there. So there's a necessity to make sure those dock walls are stable. The Western Channel, some of the pictures that Ed shared in his opening showed the concerns, and we share those concerns. And then Portland's Creatio has a very robust program that's underway for the Portland dock walls, and Jennifer will speak to that. And I do want to acknowledge all that has been done. I know it looks small on the maps, but many of you are probably very familiar with all the wave decks. Those north side slips, those dock walls were addressed during the wave deck work. As I noted, East Bayfront, so the Jarvis Slip and the Water's Edge Promenade, that was all redone. Arion Key and the Portland Slip on the west side to support the Canada malting silos, as well as Ireland Park was all redone. The Parliament Slip is currently underway. Folks probably have seen some construction over at the Parliament Slip as part of the Quayside project that's funded and progressing. And then, of course, Portland's flood protection and Oquemin-Minising. A ton of work has gone into both naturalizing and improving assets out there. And then the Portlands, I know Jennifer will speak to Leslie Lookout Park and more that's happening over in the Portlands area. So, I joke sometimes. I feel like on the waterfront there can be really flashy projects, right? There's some really amazing things going on, and I get stuck with Dockwalls, but slowly but surely it's brought up quite a lot of really interesting work and challenging work to try and get this all addressed. So as much as it might feel a little bit like Goldilocks, it's rewarding nonetheless. So I won't talk about, I'm going to leave this on the Western Beaches. And if people have questions, we can probably pop back to the Western Beaches breakwaters, and I'll throw it over to Jennifer to take it from here.
Well, thank you very much, Merrillees. I'm just going to remove your spotlight and spotlight Jennifer. And I just wanted to I know we cheekily used the term Dockwall dystopia, but I just wanted to clarify for everyone that there are no zombies on the dock walls, and there are no zombies as part of this evening's. It's a zombie-free environment in general. Just in case anyone was concerned about what dystopia might entail. Over to you, Jennifer.
All right. Hello, everyone. Let me just get my screen up here. I think I might have the right screen. Do you see my presentation?
It says you started sharing the screen, but there it is.
All right, we're in business. Okay, well, thank you everyone for having me tonight, and thank you for the intro, and Merrillees, thank you for that background. I think the amount of work that you've done over the last few years is quite impressive, and you highlighted a bunch of really key projects that have in fact moved things forward as well. So I would like to tell everyone that I am coming in at the very early stages. So we are developing a plan on how to tackle the dock walls across the whole city, which of course is a really big challenge, and we need to peel apart many layers of this really complicated onion to figure this out. But what I want to take you through tonight is how we've tackled this in the Portlands, and how we're thinking about tackling this for the entire city. And when you hear about the Portlands, I'm sure the project that comes to mind is the great work that Waterfront Toronto has done on the Portlands Flood Protection Project. And as Ed mentioned at the beginning of the call here, I was involved with the Portlands Flood Protection Project in my past life. So I was the project manager for all the marine infrastructure as part of that project. But I am going to tell you about some other things that are going on in the Portlands as part of Creatio's work. So before we dig too much into the details here, I just wanted to reflect, and we did touch on this a little bit, about why we care about dock walls. So I'm sure many of you know, but a lot of our waterfront is almost entirely built on landfill and engineered dock walls, and these are dating back to the early 1900s. So the original marshes and the shorelines were all filled in to create port and industrial lands, with the intention of supporting the industry at the time. And basically what's happened is, as the industry has declined, the purpose has shifted more to public and recreational uses, and now even more evolving towards resiliency, ecology, climate adaptation. And so really why we care about dock walls is for many reasons, but they are the hidden infrastructure that keeps our waterfront working. So they safeguard the waterfront property, the shoreline, but they also provide the necessary mooring that we need for our ferries, our recreational boats. We still have industrial shipping happening in the inner harbor, and they support the businesses that rely on this marine access. So the dock walls play a vital role in protecting the city in many ways, and really provide that recreation feature that we all love and enjoy. So who is Creatio? I'm sure some of you might be wondering. So we're a public agency. Our mandate is to manage the city's real estate portfolio. So really what we do is we're an integrated real estate entity that also acts as an asset management and development company on behalf of the city. So our portfolio is massive. We have thousands of buildings and properties, and which equates to billions in collective value. So we are really strongly driven by finding ways to deliver affordable housing, advance the needs of all of our program areas and important policy goals, and basically at the direction of council. So what does this work in real estate have to do with Dockwalls? Well, at Create TO, we manage the Toronto's Portlands. So we own about 9 kilometers of Dockwalls in the Portlands. And if I just show you here, you can get a sense of exactly where those Dockwalls are. So they're mainly in the ship channel, and you can see them all in yellow, and the numbers are the berthing numbers. So most of these Dockwalls were transferred from Ports Toronto in the late 1990s, and many exceed 100 years in age and are well past their functional design life. And many are at risk of some major failures, as we see in the rest of Toronto. So really the situation in the Portlands is very similar to what we're dealing with, just on a larger scale in the rest of the city. So Create TO has developed an asset management program for the Dockwalls in the Portlands, with the goal of creating an inspection program to identify priority areas for investigation and repair based on the Dockwall condition, legal liability, and strategic priorities. And to do this, Create TO retained a marine engineer to assess the structural condition across the entire stretch of Dockwalls. And in tandem, we've collated all that information into a central database. And so really the result of that effort is this repository of Dockwall information. So this allows us to organize the information, identify repair priorities, and the required inspection frequencies, which is of course very important because once you repair a Dockwall, it doesn't just end there. You need to keep inspecting it to make sure that there isn't new damage to the Dockwall that requires repairs in the future. So identifying that inspection frequency is key to the long-term maintenance of the Dockwalls. So the Dockwall inventory, it's a lot of information on the screen here, but really it's just to come across that it takes a lot to understand all the Dockwalls, both above and below water. And it takes an engineer to be able to assess the state and the condition of the Dockwalls. And what we want to do is collect all that information into a central repository so we could start to sort through what we know and what we don't know and where those critical repairs are needed. And so the result of this effort in the Portlands, you can see here on this map, is the priority areas. So priority 1 is red, and it's identified as some immediate repairs required. Priority 2 you can see as orange, and these are areas where we may require repairs within 5 to 10 years, pending future inspections. Priority 3 may require repairs in the kind of the 10 to 30 year mark. And then where we have new Dockwalls, you can see those very few limited Dockwalls in green, but we do have some of them. The other nice thing about the work that we've done over in the Portlands is that, and this has been talked about a little bit already, is that the ownership details can be quite complicated. And I would say while the ownership is somewhat clear in the Portlands, there are long-term and short-term lease agreements which hold lessees responsible for a certain amount of maintenance. And so in the Portlands, we've definitely spent a lot of time kind of making sure that we're holding the necessary parties accountable for those the maintenance and repair responsibilities as part of those lease agreements. So there's a heavy legal piece involved in everything that we do here related to the Dockwalls. So when it comes to Dockwall repairs themselves, there's many things that can be done And this is by no means a complete list, but some of the obvious ones here, we can naturalize the shoreline, restore it back to its natural state, instead of being a vertical dock wall. So the advantage of a vertical dock wall is that it can accommodate mooring and berthing, because it has that depth right at the edge of the dock wall. The disadvantage is that it's a structure that deteriorates over time, and requires a lot more maintenance than a naturalized shoreline. Of course, a naturalized shoreline isn't suitable everywhere because the dock walls do provide erosion protection. And depending on the type of naturalized shoreline, that may not be suitable depending on where it is along the shore and the wave and wind conditions. You can also do some minor repairs. So some of these dock walls appear like they're in rough shape at the surface, but underwater they can be in great shape and still have a lot of structural integrity left. And really what we see is a lot of that damage at the top where it's exposed to ice and waves and water level fluctuations, whereas where it's deeper in the water, it's fully submerged and less subject to those harsh environmental conditions. So when we do the inspections, sometimes we can identify just a few repairs are needed, and then a lot more of the significant kind of the visual repairs required on the surface to the concrete coat beam. The other thing we can do is we can reinforce a dock wall with a revetment, which is a pile of rocks that you put up against the dock wall to hold it in place, and basically replaces the structure of the dock wall with rock. The nice thing about a rock revetment is that it's a lot cheaper to build, and it's easier to maintain. The rocks may shift around with some ice conditions and some big storms, but they're easy to repair, low cost to repair. The disadvantage with a revetment, however, is that you are not able to moor a vessel up against it because it takes that draft away. So again, there's very limited locations where we would be able to implement a revetment. You can always install a new dock wall, and so this is building a brand new dock wall in front of an old dock wall. And I would say this is when you need to replace the structure like for like. This is the way to go. But with a new dock wall comes with the ongoing maintenance and repairs associated with that. But it does also keep the dock wall in its current state and being able to accommodate those vessels. And then, of course, there's a hybrid approach. A combination of any of the above could be combined on a stretch of shoreline depending on the use. And I would say, regardless of the approach selected, one thing that we want to ensure we do with this program is to incorporate the necessary safety equipment. So ladders and the safety furniture up to the current standards. We saw some photos from Ed where the ladders were in terrible condition. And Ed, you showed that photo of the one for the Keating Channel North dock wall. And really the standards there are quite simple for present day, and we just need to make sure that's implemented in all the dock walls that we touch. And I think one of the things we're going to be looking at is how many of those critical safety repairs could we do sooner rather than later. And the other thing we want to do when we look at all these dock walls and start implementing repairs is consider habitat restoration. We saw with the Portland's flood protection project, or even with the wave decks where we've had habitat restoration included in those dock walls. If you build it, the fish will come. And so the more that we can do to improve fish habitat as part of our work in the water, the better for the health of the lake. So when determining the appropriate approach to dock wall rehabilitation, it is essential to balance multiple interests and identify any opportunities. And so things we need to consider are the public. We want to make sure that the public has access to the waterfront and that it is a safe environment, and that we want to make sure that our dock wall rehabilitation program aligns with some goals to create open space, more recreation, and just it really enhance our shoreline as much as we can. We want to align with existing city goals, and we want to ensure that our repairs support that broader objective of climate resilience, economic development, public safety. We want to integrate with existing strategies. So there's been a lot of great studies that have been completed to date. The Marine Use Strategy, Western Beaches Strategy, the Toronto Island Master Plan, just to name a few. So everything that we do with this program, we want to make sure that it is in line with the existing good work that has been done. We also want to make sure that we're collaborating with all the agencies. So there are a lot of key partners involved with the waterfront, and we need to engage them all to make sure that we have a comprehensive approach to the way that we manage the dock walls. So we're already having conversations with TRCA, Ports Toronto, Waterfront Toronto, Transport Canada, DFO, and Fisheries and Oceans. So there's quite a lot of parties at the table to make sure that this is done in a comprehensive manner. And then ownership, we talked about ownership a little bit, but this is really a key one, and it can slow down the process. So we want to make sure that we are ahead of the ball when it comes to ownership, to make sure that we have a good handle on who owns what, tenant arrangements and responsibilities, and align that with our recommendations. Okay, so now that we've looked at the different repair options and we've considered the interests and opportunities that shape the decision-making that's to come, I thought I could share a few examples of Create.to's recent work in the Portlands. So these projects will highlight how dockwall rehabilitation plays out in practice, and sometimes as part of proactive renewal tied to redevelopment, sometimes as an opportunity to unlock new public spaces, and other times, unfortunately, as emergency repairs, but it does happen. So I think this will give a good broad overview of some of the things that have happened in the Portlands. So starting here with
Jennifer, maybe
yeah.
we can fly through a couple of the examples and then get to let people, if there's discussion question, I just want to make sure we have enough time to do that.
Yeah, for sure. Good point.
Oh, yeah, no, we have lots of time. Go, no, feel
Okay,
free.
great.
No, give us
Great.
the full thing. Come on,
Okay.
Jennifer. Go for it, Jennifer.
Love
All
it.
right. Leslie Lookout Park. So this was repurposing an underused industrial parcel of land in the Portlands, and it was transformed into a new waterfront destination with an urban beach and a lookout experience. And it is a really beautiful destination. If you haven't been, you should definitely check it out. So Create.to built this project. It was completed in 2024, and it includes a 13.5-meter lookout tower with an artificial beach and a boardwalk, seating. Many plants were placed, and there's some indigenous features. And I would say that the key takeaway for this one is it demonstrates how city-owned industrial lands can be transformed into a really nice public space where we're addressing the shoreline and the dockwall interface at the same time as building high quality public realm. And this is just one small example of this, but there's many examples across Toronto's waterfront where we've taken kind of industrial lands and transformed them. I would say the Portlands Flood Protection Project by Waterfront Toronto is a great example of that as well. So here's another example where we had some emergency repairs required in the ship channel. So basically what happened here is a vessel was positioned such that its propeller wash scoured the base of the dock wall. And this scour hole caused the dock wall to be undermined and this giant sinkhole to develop. So this was emergency works that took place in 2023. And the way it was rebuilt was we had to rebuild the failed section of dock wall with new sheet piles and armor stone. And you can see the granular fill here in the sinkhole. But this is one of those ones that it's just unfortunate with the positioning of the vessel was there for a long time, scoured the bottom of the dock wall, but also reminded us how proactive monitoring and preventative measures are far more cost effective than deploying emergency responses and repairs such as this. Basin Media Promenade. So this is a new dock wall that was built by Creatio, and it was just completed last year in 2024. And this one is an example of how dock wall renewal can be integrated with a redevelopment. And this was done proactively. So the idea was that Creatio rebuilt this dock wall to unlock this land for future development. And the key for this one was really making sure that it was built to accommodate what may come in the future for this parcel of land, and making sure that with this new dock wall, we implement those new standards of life-saving equipment, such as ladders that can withstand ice forces and be protected from being bumped by vessels mooring up against the dock wall. So you see that ladder kind of recessed in. And then also making sure that all the safety furniture is positioned adequately along the dock wall to ensure that it's safe for the public. Okay, so one more here, we have Bathurst Quay. So this is a good example of how dock walls can be rebuilt in tandem with a broader redevelopment to ensure that the dock wall is maintained while creating this new public amenity. So this was initiated through the Bathurst Quay Neighborhood Plan in 2017. And it really set out the vision to revitalize this industrial site and reconnect the community to the waterfront. So this was led by the City of Toronto in collaboration with Waterfront Toronto, Ports Toronto, and Creatio. And this was a really great example of multi-agency coordination and shared funding to deliver this project. So moving on to our plan for the rest of the city. So the examples that I just went through highlight many ways that dock wall renewal can play out, supporting redevelopment, creating new public spaces, or dealing with emergency failures. And what they all point to is the need for a proactive and a consistent approach. And so that's why we're really building this citywide program, is we want to keep all of our assets in a state of good repair and be able to capitalize on these works to create new public spaces where we can and prioritize our investments in a really thoughtful way. So the approach that we're taking here for what we've coined the Marine Infrastructure Asset Management Program is really to build a citywide marine asset management program. We want to strengthen our knowledge and our standards. So consolidate all that information that we have that's scattered around the city, understand what we know and what we don't know, create standards for life-saving equipment, and some of those key features for dock wall repairs so we can start to implement them a little bit more efficiently. We want to deliver resilient and multi-benefit infrastructure. So we want to implement this program that not only strengthens infrastructure, but also enhances the public access and the environmental benefits. And then we also want to plan for sustainable long-term renewal. So we want to introduce a rolling 10-year plan that will help us plan our investments and to extend the service life of all the dock walls across the city. So how we're tackling this is we have developed a three-phased approach, 3 phases right now. I'm sure it'll meld into many more phases. But really the first phase is what we're doing right now. We are reviewing all the background information and we're figuring out what we know and what we don't know. And we're compiling this information into a centralized inventory into an asset management database. And once we have all that information, we're going to prioritize it based on several criteria. We don't just want to look at the condition of the dock wall, although that is likely the most important. We want to make sure that we're layering in many factors when we prioritize these dock walls once we compile all the information. And then moving into phase 2, we want to do some condition assessments. We want to figure out where we don't have any information and start to fill in those gaps so they can also enter this prioritization exercise. So in 2026, we want to start with those highest priority areas that don't have condition assessments, have those done by an engineer, and have a dive inspection done and collect all that detailed technical information we need to then begin repairs. So we're hoping to begin repairs starting in 2027. So the idea is we start with the highest priorities and we continue those through to repairs. And then in parallel, we continue on filling in the gaps on those lower priority dock walls where we're still missing condition assessments. So huge caveat, this is the thinking right now in terms of the 3 phases and how we're going to tackle it. But I think a lot will unfold as we start to get more and more into the program. And one of the key things that we're developing along the way is a asset management database. And we are actively working on this right now at Create TO. We're collating all the existing information from various sources, including the city, what we have in-house at Create TO from Waterfront Toronto, TRCA, Ports Toronto. I would even say that Ed, your report from Waterfront from All is in our database as well in terms of all the information on the existing conditions of our dock walls. The other thing we're compiling is any legal documents on ownership and title and leasing information. Engineering drawings are so important. You know, sometimes we're able to find those really old drawings that was on one of my first slides showing a cross section from a dock wall in the 1900s. Having those as-built are critical for being able to understand what the repairs look like. And then also photos. You know, photos are great for identifying quickly what a dock wall looks like. And so having a great inventory of all this information together in a database is what we're working on right now. And then the other thing we're doing is we're creating it into a mapping format. So we want to be able to have quick access to background documents and everything that we know about these dock walls. So we're spending a bit of time working in GIS and different asset management softwares to sort through all the data and develop the best way we can to organize it all and make it easily accessible when we start to go through and do these repairs. So next steps, where we are right now, as I mentioned, we're going to continue through phase 1. So this background review, the development of the asset management database will continue through to Q2 of 2026. And then we're hoping to start those high priority condition assessments in 2026. So that is all for this evening. Thank you.
There we go. Okay, Ed, do you have a lead, having seen all this, since really it's all your fault that we're here, no?
Yeah, thanks.
And now
I'll plunge in, I guess, with a kind of a question or sort of a comment, which is that, first of all, thank you very much for that very interesting presentation. I was very interested in Jennifer's remark about how, there are different options. You can have naturalized land and so on. Now, of course, the reason why we have these high dock walls mostly is because Toronto's harbor was for a long time basically an industrial port. So its purpose was, to unload ships and take stuff off ships, put it on trains or put it in warehouses and all that kind of stuff. So that it would appear that we're now in an era where, at least, of course, we still have shipping and we still have, cruise boats and we have, boats with different functions. But it seems that we have a wide variety of users potentially of the lake, where some of it could be naturalized shoreline. You could have docks at different levels. For example, there was an experiment in the Yonge Street slip in the last 2 years at Waterfront Toronto where they had a kind of a visiting dock for sailboats in the Yonge Street slip. Too high for kayaks, so it doesn't really work for my pals. but perhaps we could have lower docks, and in some places, of course, promenades are appropriate. Kind of T-docks that stick out as we have around Harborfront. And I guess my question would be is that you know, what your talk kind of indicated, it's not just a question of fixing what's there, it's also sort of a question of figuring out what are our priorities, what do people want to use our waterfront for, which is not an easy thing. It's a political question. I see that. And I'm just wondering if you guys have thought about how you might determine what the different users want and what kinds of different approaches to different parts of the harbor and the western beaches, etc. You know, we might have in the future.
Yeah, maybe I can start and Jennifer pass it off to you. Thanks, Ed, for that. You know, ultimately, my observation, and you know, to be clear, I think it's just on what I've seen to date, is that we come to the recommendations based on a lot of variety of stakeholder conversations and consultation, whether it's talking with residents and community members, but also with property owners or business operators, et cetera, to kind of figure out what the needs are in a specific location. But looking at the use today and then ultimately the end, you know, what it could be, to help inform those decisions. And then the other piece that comes with that is an understanding of some of the goals around the natural environment, preservation, protection, enhancement, that are possible, and the cost evaluation that comes into play with all of those decisions. I think there's really a number of layers here that come into figuring out what the right solution is in a specific location. And I think in some instances, the solution is generated by a big idea. Like it might be, you know, that right now we're looking at the breakwaters in the western beaches. There are big ideas for just modifying the breakwaters entirely. And so those are things we need to think about and continue to have those conversations on.
Yeah, and I
Thank you.
think what I can add is for us is making sure that we're not working in a silo, making sure that we're listening to all the relevant parties that need to have a say, and make sure that we are prioritizing things in a fair manner, to taking into account everything that we need to take into account. So it's not just, I mentioned, it's not just the critical state of the dock walls, because to be fair, a lot of them are in the same critical state of needing repairs. So then how do you prioritize the critical from the critical? And then that's when you get into those other layers that Merrillees was talking about. And I think the way that we do that is really to not work in isolation and be as collaborative as we can, with all the different partners involved.
Right, thank you. Pam, did you have a question? You have to unmute yourself, Pam. Yeah, I can't do it for you. I just tried and
Okay.
it's not working. There you go.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This has been really interesting. I've been harping on the care about the dock walls for a really long time at another committee meeting that I used to sit on, which did not take minutes and was just an information sharing. But I used to, one of those people, it doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. It was called a Harbor Liaison Committee, and it had Harborfront and police and quite a number of stakeholders sitting on it. And one of the things that came clear to me at one point in time was the concerns of the police in terms of access to get out of the water as well as in. And I don't know whether you have engaged the harbor police in any of your discussions. They just talked about a young woman who had jumped in to commit suicide and changed her mind and couldn't get out. She was fortunately saved before she died by the harbor police. They, by accident, found her. So I just am wondering if you have considered that. I know 2 people have died on that collapsed Eastern Gap wall. in the past years. And so I'm really happy that finally Ports Toronto are going to have to take full responsibility for that gap. They've avoided it for a really long time. And it is, as a sailor, it's an extremely dangerous place. The other thing that I just wanted to ask is about the walls around Toronto Island and the walls in the lagoons that are collapsing, and the wall that actually protects the whole island that runs along the boardwalk, which is there are areas where the concrete is breaking off, and it's been there for a really long time. It's an extraordinary wall. It gets a great deal of weather. So I don't know whether you have added, I don't see that in any of your areas of concern, but I think it should be considered. The park is extremely busy and important for Toronto. It's one of the most visited areas for tourism. And I think that the erosion that's taking place, I know there's been some mitigation for that, for sure, but I do think an assessment of the walls in the park would be a very helpful and important thing to do.
Yeah, both great comments and questions. Because it was your last and just on that theme, Toronto Islands, very well timed. Myself and Jennifer and staff from TRCA are going to be meeting shortly to be talking about those various structures around the Toronto Islands, along with the oversight right now through Parks and Recreation at the City of Toronto. So that's a really good example where there's many players, and we're right now going to be commencing conversations about a condition assessment to be done around the Toronto Islands for the dock walls. I don't know, I can't answer right now exactly if it's going to cover absolutely everything. We are in those conversations, so you're right, it's not on the list of slides, but I can tell you there were emails and discussions today about it, actually, where we are progressing that work. So I would anticipate maybe not the assessments this fall potentially, but if we can move that quickly, we will. And otherwise, in the spring, I would think we'll be doing condition reporting on all of those assets around the islands. And then back to your first question with the Harbor Police. So actually, I went on a marine tour with the Harbor Police earlier this summer, and we did all of the we did all the way, we did from the Humber over to the Portlands, and discussed a number of issues, both with the various boating activities within the harbor, inner harbor, and some of the challenges, as well as the safety of people who either by choice end up in the water or by accident end up in the water. So we are having those discussions, but more is needed. I'll definitely acknowledge that was a first touch point, and much more is needed. So it's an excellent point to raise, and more to come on the safety there. The one thing I would acknowledge that we didn't speak to is just Parks and Recreation. So again, trying to put everything under one kind of framing management umbrella, so there's not so many disconnected pieces. Parks and Recreation does have a 2026 plan to be doing a full assessment of all of the safety elements along the waterfront. So that includes waters and life safety devices, etc. So we're going to be working with them to figure out where that fits in this overall management umbrella and how that proceeds, and the relationship of that with the dock wall work itself, recognizing that, you know, some of the damage that was shown in the images earlier is caused by ice, and how we manage that if we're not, you know, depending on the timing of dock wall replacements, etc. So again, lots more work needed on that, but acknowledgement of things in the works to move that along.
It's so great this is happening. It's really great. Thank you.
I wish it would happen faster. So that's the one, I can see it in the comments too. Everyone wishes it would happen faster. And I think we're all feel the same.
Well, it's so long overdue.
Thank
Want
you.
to catch up.
Okay, thanks, Pam. And thank you for the answer. So I've got several hands up, and I've also got some people who are shyer and asking questions in the chat. So I'm going to go to a chat question, then I've got Steve, and then Carolyn and Peter. And I probably will squeeze in another chat question in between after Steve as well. There were several questions. I think, my sense is that you answered this largely in the presentation, but there have been several questions about the database of Dockwall information and about the number of people and the amount of Dockwall spaces on private long-term leases versus public versus that. Can you guys just give a very quick summary of that and whether and how much of that information is public or will be made public?
So the figures that I showed on my screen are in the June staff report to exec that went to executive committee. So it's
Great. So that's publicly available.
So you can
and we
see
can
those
link to it.
figures.
We can also link to that report for those of you who are interested. In our recap of this event, we can provide the link to that at waterfrontforall.ca. So that answers that question.
Yeah, those are the attachments. So you'll find them under the attachment heading for the staff report. In terms of making the database fully accessible the way we have all of our open data, I think our ultimate goal is there. But as I said, we're still we still all the information is draft, and we're still in the process of verifying as well as transferring actually the database over to Creatio. So one of the things Jennifer's been doing over the last 2 months is getting all of that information and compiling it. So I think the ultimate goal, yes, would be to make that public. I saw some questions, I'm not sure where they were in the chat, about the information on the short-term and long-term leases.
Yes.
That has a little more legal sensitivity, is my understanding from legal services about what could be shared within the databases. But the maps that are within the staff report do show generally where we have our short and long-term lease information. So you can see that at like a high level. And we're in the conversations as things, we try to make more things public. We go through the legal services to just get the okay on what can actually go up.
Right, but we don't have a situation like Frenchman's Bay in Pickering where there's somebody privately owns the bay and the water dating back to pre-Confederation.
No.
Ultimately, underneath the leases, it is all public land. Is that correct? Is that a correct interpretation on the water's edge, or is there some that's absolutely private?
Locations, but most of it, yes, the vast majority. There's a couple locations, but yeah, vast majority, and then potentially long-term leases associated with those,
right?
And obligations with the leases.
Right. So yeah, I understand. Professor Steve, if you unmute yourself, you may ask a question.
Yes, I have a very quick, short, simple question regarding human rights.
Bless you.
A short, simple question regarding human rights. So what I wanted to find out, if there is or plans to be, or why there isn't, I guess, a public access ramp for persons with disabilities who might use alternate means. At present, the only wheelchair accessible beach is HTO Beach. And that's where I usually go because I can get to it easily. And I throw my paddleboard over the edge, and then I jump in the water and swim over to my paddleboard and climb up upon it. But I figure it would be nice if there was a ramp so that I could just get in, especially with other alternative, like a water walker. I use other vessels, which are like a walk on water walker, or a ball or something, which is the equivalent of walker rollator that you'd use on land, but on water. And it's incomprehensible to me. I guess I just don't know, why is there no accessibility ramps, whereas other cities usually have them to allow people with disabilities to easily get in and out of the water at many of these downtown areas where you can actually get to with a wheelchair.
Thank you, Steve. And can I just tack on, and also like a downtown or central downtown kayak launch that would be accessible as well, easy, as well, to layer that on top of what Steve is saying. I think there are multiple definitions of being able to access the water.
Yeah, and I am a member of the Harborfront Canoe and Kayak Center, but there should also, in addition to that, be a public one. And also, even though I'm a paying member there, and that ramp is unusable sometimes because there's a lot going on there, and there needs to really be a public ramp somewhere that works about that way, where you can get in easily with
Thank-
disabilities.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
something that can be thought of as we think about Dockwall restoration? And I mean, Jennifer, is that something that would be, not cost us I think it would be cheaper than tunneling under the 401.
100%. I think that, accessibility will be an important consideration with any of the rehabilitation work that we do, particularly depending on the end use of the shoreline in which we're looking at. But yeah, we'll take that back and make sure that we incorporate that in where we can.
Yeah, and I think just on Steve, on your comments there, I also saw what you were putting in the chat, and I appreciate it. And I think calling great attention to it is required. There is, I think, this is also trying to figure out where we integrate and how we overlap with the overall broader marine use strategy and the Marine Coordination Committee. The dock walls themselves might be a facilitating link to a bigger question of waterfront accessibility and universal accessibility to the waterfront. And I think, like, this is some of your commentary to take back, I will take back to the Marine Coordination Committee in the bigger picture of, best locations and improved ramp access, et cetera. So I think that there are multiple teams to be looking to this and to be applying this kind of lens on a series of projects that include some dock wall work, but also include broader waterfront and inner harbor and marine access.
And that's really a safety issue as well, because there's a lot of people using HTO Beach with disabilities because it is the only accessible beach in Toronto, who get in there and have trouble getting out. I've actually rescued a few people who got in there. They throw their board in, they jump in, they swim over to their board, and when it's they try to come back out, they're having trouble getting back out, or various things happening. I've lent my board to people, and they've had trouble swimming back and climbing back out, some of them with shoulder injuries and stuff like that. A ramp would really improve safety massively.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm going to, Carolyn, you've been very, very patient. Carolyn?
Yeah, good evening, everybody. I want to raise an issue from a completely different bunch of users of the water, and that is dogs. Okay, I used to have a chocolate lab. He used to get extremely hot in the summer, always craving water to get into. And so I was always terrified that he would lean over the side looking at the water and fall in. I called Marine Police and they said, yeah, call us if he falls in and we'll come rescue him on our boat. But that's really not adequate. Many, many dogs would really love to get damp. I have taken him to that floating ramp thingy at Harbourfront Kayak Club many, many times. And it's kind of scary standing on that slippery thing, bouncing up and down while your dog rolls around in the water at the edge. So it would be cool if there was some places for our puppies as well to cool off in the summer.
Carolyn, thank you for that. Teddy's actually sleeping. My golden doodle's sleeping, but occasionally he puts his head in because he has only one political issue, which is more off-leash dog areas on the waterfront.
Absolutely right. Yeah, Terry Beach is wonderful, but you have to drive there. It'd be nice to just walk along the waterfront here and find a spot to cool down. So.
Yeah, and I'll just add that that's, in Jennifer's work, areas where we can be doing some naturalization where it's allows for kind of a more natural, simpler access to and from might be quite an interesting lens to apply to the dog access as
Thank you. Can I raise one other question, which is, have you included our Indigenous friends in how you might naturalize the waterfront? Thank you.
Absolutely. Both out of wanting to gain interest and insight, but also from our reconciliation action plan efforts and advancing our reconciliation programs, including Indigenous rights holders as well as residents and businesses in the conversations, is a big part of what we're doing.
Okay, thank you very much. This is a great presentation. Thank you.
Peter, you've been very patient.
Oh, yes. Thanks. I really appreciate this. As someone who really enjoys paddling and rowing and being on the water as much as possible, I always wonder why we, and to echo Steve Mann's comments, why we couldn't have more just floating docks that are tethered at kayak level or rowing shell level that would, for example, at the Leslie Lookout, it would be very easy to have. I used to row out of there when the Bayside Club was there, and there was a ramp down to a floating dock that could be easily positioned. There were boats going in and out of the ship channel, but we just they went at 5 kilometers an hour, and we went at 5 kilometers an hour, and everything was fine. You know, it can all be done safely, and there's not that the boat traffic isn't really huge, so it's more than just docks. We need to create just like we have a ravine plan, we need to create a waterway plan to allow people to really enjoy this wonderful resource. You know, just being on the water, seeing the sun, reflecting on the water, which is the name of the park, needs to be appreciated by far more people. And there's no reason why we couldn't have thousands of people out on slowly moving boats that are human powered and don't get swamped out by jet skis or wakeboards. But you know, it's just about managing the water surface as well as the water dock interface. And there's lots of materials and technologies that can enable this. Moby mats can be rolled out over all kinds of surfaces, but you just need to create those a kinder and gentler interface between the water and the shore. And
Yeah, I
there's still
appreciate
that big
Yeah.
ramp underwater. I mean, that's still very good. But just, you know, that the last couple of feet could be modified to allow more accessibility.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think the Marine Coordination Committee is looking at the floating docks options across the waterfront, with Waterfront Toronto kind of leading that
They're
review.
not
So
expensive.
I do think you'll potentially see more of that next year. I know they're working to try and get a couple of pilot locations.
Can community groups approach Creatio to claim, you know, 60 feet of water wall where they would actually manage that little floating dock that allows their community to access it in that area. And so it doesn't have
Peter,
to be.
That's crazy talk, Peter. You know, there are live conversations about that in New York City and London and
Of
in
course,
Paris.
of course.
And in Paris.
You can get rowing shells going out or all around Paris.
And people are
and
swimming
it's
in the
a good
Seine.
business, but it's also good to community building.
Yeah, well, and people are swimming in the Seine again, which is, you know, I confess I find that a bit iffy, but they are indeed swimming in the Seine. Jennifer's asked a number of questions. So Jennifer said we're not talking about the eastern beaches, and no, we're not, because there's not a lot of dock wall in the eastern beach except around R.C. Harris filtration plant, which is probably worth a thought, because some of that's a bit sketch, or so it appears. I know that it's an annual tradition when the high schools close for the kids to go down to the edge of the R.C. Harris water filtration plant and jump off the end of the dock wall. Luckily, that part of the water is deep enough that they don't wind up, you know, paralyzing themselves or injuring themselves. And there's another question. I'm just going to let you get at this 1 second, because you've both talked about this a bit, but I just love to hear you here about it. So there have been some questions too about like who's looking after the whole waterfront. Now, this is something that's very close to our hearts. Now, we're a tiny microscopic little volunteer group with virtually no money. But even we have sometimes we've encountered the volunteer community version of how many different organizations are there on the waterfront, and do they talk to each other, or in some cases, do they even want to talk to each other? You know, it remains Waterfront for All's dream that we will have a network of folks that we can reach out to and work with from the Rouge to the Etobicoke Creek. But so I'm going to just, for those of you who don't know or haven't been at some of other presentations, if you're going east of the R.C. Harris water filtration plant, all the way to where the Rouge National Park now starts, that is primarily, now Parks and Rec are involved with, you know, Bluffers, of course, but that is primarily the province, the kingdom, the empire of the Conservation Authority. And they are in the process of implementing, admittedly a bit slowly, Premier Ford, send more money. They're implementing the Scarborough Waterfront Project Phase 1, which goes from Bluffers Park to East Point Park and sort of nudging towards the Port Union waterfront, which Waterfront Toronto famously worked with in the city many years ago. And they're about to begin the environmental assessment for the West Scarborough Bluffs waterfront project in 50-50 partnership with the City of Toronto. And that will look at the waterfront from west of Bluffers Park to, in fact, all the way to Silver Birch Avenue in the Eastern Beaches. And the goal of that project, the outline of the topics that are going to be discussed is erosion control, naturalization whenever possible, aka beach preservation and enhancement, aquatic water health for the creatures who live in our waterfront, and a continuous navigable walking path the entire length. So that one day, if we all live long enough, one day you'll be able to walk all the way from basically, pretty much from along the water's edge from the Rouge National Park as far as you can go before you hit something called Mississauga. Anyway, that's that part. But the thing is, so you were mentioning this before, there is a desire, I think, a building desire, which is for somebody to be coordinating all of our friends. There's the Ports Toronto, there's Waterfront Toronto, there's the Secretariat, there's Creatio, there's etc. Right? And I know you mentioned something en passant about the Secretariat. Is that something the Secretariat's really looking at, truly wrapping its hands around?
Short answer, yes.
Sorry for the editorial, but it is something
no, it's okay.
that many of us are passionate about, right?
It's very good context. And, I will note over in the West End, there are dock walls, around Mimico and things like this that are important. So, yes, we received one of the motions that we received, or directions, sorry, that we received in the June council report was to expand to cover the whole dock or the whole waterfront. And that is consistent with also the Waterfront Secretariat's direction on next phase waterfront revitalization. So similarly, last year in 2024, when we did the next phase waterfront revitalization update for council, we also received similar direction to be waterfront wide. And so what I can share now is that requires staffing up, really, ultimately, for us to be able to take on from end to end. We need a few more bodies to help lead that work. And that's what we're doing right now.
People can get their CVs ready if they wish.
Yeah.
Okay, so for example, could that potentially mean that that the Secretariat would sort of be looking over would be more directly involved, for example, in the West Scarborough EA when that gets restarts?
Yeah, so we're already involved in it. So we already have 2 staff members on that project.
It got slowed down by a number of factors, including a provincial election. Oops.
Yes.
No, as you may guess from what I'm saying,
you're well
I'm involved in that.
Okay. So yeah, so ultimately, we already are involved in that, and we're being pulled in. I think one of the things about the Secretariat is that our job in many cases is to encourage and align resources and teams to be delivering key waterfront priorities. We're not always the leader. For example, in Scarborough, TRCA is leading that work, but our job is to make sure that the right folks and connections are being made across various agencies, organizations, stakeholders, et cetera, to progress all of this work. So right now that is our mandate, and just acknowledging that that's a relatively, in this grand scheme of Waterfront Secretariat roles and responsibilities, it's a relatively recent expansion of our focus area.
Well, and it is, straight line, it's 43 kilometers. The wiggly coastal line, I think it's well up there, closer to 80, right? If you do all the wiggles, right? So that's good to know. Okay, if you haven't had your question answered, can you put up your hand or ask it? And especially if we have, in particular, I would love to privilege someone who we haven't heard from yet. Oh, Catherine. Catherine, yes, go ahead, Catherine.
Hi, yes. Well, I was wondering because on the weekend there was a public art project that was organized by the Bentway, and it was really spectacular. And there were all these canoes, and I was really curious, how did all the canoes and canoers get into the water?
Great question. So that happened at Petoskey Park. It was the launch area, and for folks who go by there regularly, they would have seen the canoes already starting to arrive a few days before the event. But it was organized through the Bentway, and then some 400 volunteers. There were applications. There was a process to get involved, but all of those canoes got delivered to the Shoreline, and then the volunteers were organized through this application process with the Bentway. But it was quite a spectacular event. And if folks missed it, if you go to the Bentway's website, you can see they have a series of videos now posted that show you what the exhibit was all about.
And again, the reason why I mentioned it, Merrillees, is because there's an example of what could be done and what should be done. So that, yay, great that you're working on it.
Great, thank you. Peter, just before I go back to you, and I will go back to you because we do have sufficient time for that. Anyone else who hasn't already asked a question?
Just interrupting quickly, the last question was not answered. How did the canoes get in the water?
Oh, right. How did the canoes get in the water?
Oh, you can get, there is a canoe access point at Petoskey Park.
Oh, is that the one that's 500 meters away from where you park?
You do have to. There is a process. There's a trailer required, or or human strength.
Sorry, not to.
Yeah, fair enough. But yes, they were put at the boat launch that's at Petoskey Park. But you're right, there is.
It would be nice if there was but I know Canoe Cove's supposed to make that. Isn't that supposed to make it easier when Canoe Cove actually happens?
I believe so. Yeah, that'll be much closer to being able to park and then launch.
I'm just gonna phone Chris Blasek at home right now and ask him.
Yes, call him. He'll fix it.
We were just talking about you at a public meeting with a couple hundred people, Chris. Can you? Okay, Peter, you have a follow-up. You have to unmute yourself, lad.
It's related to this point is, I mean, with the big diversion of the big pipe projects to clear up the near shore water, there's far more animals and fish, and the weeds are growing. There's a lot more things happening down there, but this is still considered a port. And is there any possibility of extending the Rouge National Park to create a new type of national park that is looking at this interface, which is all built, it wasn't natural land, but it's all landfill, and yet most of the lake, the harbor front of shoreline of GTA is unnatural land, and it's a real interesting experiment happening. And can it be monitored? Can it be studied? Can you have buoys that can record underwater sounds? And can you tag fish and see how do we extend the surveillance of this waterway by the people that are using it and the buoys that are there? I believe that this could be a very interesting way of just allowing the people who live north of Bloor, I guess, to appreciate this wonderful resource that we have. It's amazing to see the sun's shimmering on the water, and everyone should have the opportunity to do that, including people who live up north of St. Clair, north of Lawrence. and possibly even be able to canoe down from down the Eastern Don. Just a couple of little dams would allow our navigable waterways to extend up into the north of Toronto. And that's, I think that's a new sort of, it's a navigable waterway that is controlled by the federal government, and they should play a role in funding our ability to navigate those waterways. I know it's pie in the sky, but I think it's you're seeing this right now is what you're dealing with, just this it's a commercial harbor wall, but it's really to protect the navigable waterways, which is guaranteed. That's what Canada was built on. The BNA Act was, which I'm not making sense now, but anyway, so
no, I know
where
what
I'm
you
going
mean.
to.
I do know what you mean. It's true. But of course, as someone who grew up in, thank you, Peter. As someone who grew up in British Columbia, of course, when you're on the ocean, on the sea, right? Then the feds are much more involved. Funny how that works. I always get confused about the Great Lakes. I know about who I get confused. I know we've talked about this before, but I think it's really hard to understand sometimes who's responsible for what, right? There's fisheries and oceans, which is federal. There's the provincial Ministry of the Environment, right? Then there's you, right? So it's just, yeah.
It's an interesting question, Peter. Like I haven't thought of that before, heard that before, but it is an interesting question about kind of the broad national interest and citywide interest in the evolution of a both natural and man-made shipping and recreational waterfront that has a story to it. And so, I appreciate the thought, because I think it's an interesting one. I'm not sure, what that could lead to, but I know that there are, you're tying together the fact that there's multiple layers unfolding here that have very different storylines, whether you're shipping and the history and the continued operation and advancement of the port, as Jennifer can attest to, with all of what's happening in the port. And we know, Eastern Gap is a federal interest because of the shipping happening in the area. And then we have, also at the same time in the same area, previous comment about this beautiful canoe exhibit and flag exhibit where we're naturalizing. So these two things do come together. It's a very interesting idea to bring up, Peter.
But I also think Peter's point, and it's not the first person who's made it, and I know it's outside your purview, but I appreciate your generosity in letting us dream a little outside the box. But I mean, many people have said, I remember some folks who were involved in the early days of Bring Back the Dawn said to me, well, waterfront for all, but are you guys going to think about the rivers? Because of course, you can argue that the watershed and the rivers are actually conceptually, hydrologically, naturally part of our waterfront as well. So it's just throwing out there. And to Peter's point too, I want to say that we have talked about, and I think we should do that, is we've talked about having a speaker series event with the good people who run the national park at the Rouge, right? Because they are sort of and by the way, they are spending a significant amount of money right now improving the beach, building boardwalks in the marsh area of the twin, where the twin rivers meet before they flow into, because there's two Rouge rivers, right? Before they flow into the lake. There's actually a fairly significant infrastructure investment, parkland infrastructure investment happening in the Rouge National Park at the moment. But yeah, I'm sure if the feds wanted to give Mayor Chow some more money for waterfront things, she wouldn't say no. Just tack another couple million on.
I jump in because I'm not sure if it's your lady's purview or not, but I would say that in general, sort of following up on Peter's point and some of the other points, it would be quite easy to make the waterfront much more accessible to little boats. There are a number of very cheap things. I mean, just one example would be, there's a pretty good place to portage across the Leslie Street spit. It's very hard to find. There's no sign. You could have a minor bit of kind of like asphalt or something, corduroy road. I mean, it's a very short little area, but it's hard. You're kind of clambering over concrete and rebar and stuff right now. There, there are various other things like that. You can have sort of low docks, various places. But one of the problems there, and if anybody asks me, I know exactly what I'd suggest, and there are other people that I would want to find out what they thought. But the problem, as Edward has sort of alluded to, is it's very hard to know who to talk to about it, because it's not really clear who's in charge. Like, is the Waterfront Secretary in charge? I don't think so. Maybe they are. Maybe they now are, but didn't used to be. I'm not sure. There's TRCA. They have a lot of things on their plate. It's a little bit hard to know. I'm encouraged. I ran into Olivia Chow in a kayak yesterday, or was it the day before? She's a kayaker. She's out there. There's a lot of people out there on kayaks, and they have a sort of a shared interest in sort of, just getting around the waterfront, having places to go. People can dangle their feet in the water. Things like that, I think, are really important and have been neglected and not really thought about. I totally love the new park, Ogrodnick Willemse. It's not that great for canoe access, actually,
Yeah.
but we don't need to get into it. There's all of these little things that could be done pretty easily, just by asking a few people who are interested in it, sort of for suggestions, and some of them would be amazing. Like, they'd have the budget would be, $1,000 or something like that. Anyway.
And I won't, as a former West Coaster, I won't talk about, being in parts of Vancouver where you can kayak up, tie your kayak up, or pull it up on shore, and then, within, a meter, you can be sitting at a nice table having a glass of wine on the waterfront. Okay, quickly before, okay, I've got time for two. There's two more hands. We're gonna go back to Carolyn and Pam. Let's be quick, because we are getting close to time, when magically I will not just be wearing an orange shirt, I will turn into an orange pumpkin. Pam, can we start with you? Quick-ish?
Yeah, just a quick comment about the Ed was just talking about the portage over the Leslie Street spit. I actually think there should be a canoe type cut at the base where Leslie Street spit and the mainland meets. A cut. It doesn't have to be big for big boats or anything, just a kayaker's small boat access to go around that spit in a small vessel. It gets you right out into the lake, and there's a whole lot of shoreline east of the spit for people to explore. And I just can't see that it would need a fairly small bridge. It doesn't have to be super high. We're not talking about big sailboats or anything going through. But I just think that's the spit is a completely artificial break in our shoreline, and I see no reason why we can't make a cut at that base for safe travels for the smaller vessels.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I will flag to everyone that since this is coming up, the Tommy Thompson Park Visitor Experience Plan work is starting. There will be informal folks on site over the Thanksgiving weekend, speaking with visitors and observing and kind of figuring initial data collection, etc. So encourage people to go there. But I'm also on the advisory group for that, and I will bring this idea to talk about some very minimalist connections that would allow for manual, motorized boats to be able to pass without having to go around the whole spit. I agree. I'm a paddler myself, but I'm in the East End, so I don't. It's a whole day to plan to go around the spit and all the way back.
Yeah.
Well, and Merrillees too, there are people who paddle who are, not exactly young and may not have the wherewithal. Like, I know someone who's a semi-regular paddler who pushing 90. He's not about to go around the spit unless he's with a group of people. So I know, I'm just saying you can frame it in an equity lens on old folks,
It's
equity
an
lens.
8 to 80 lens on.
Yeah.
Because I take my kids paddling, but I don't want to take them and then have to figure out to get them back.
Okay, Carolyn, I'm going to give you the last question comment of the evening. So
Oh.
make it a good one.
Oh, thank you so much.
No pressure.
Just picking up on Ed's idea and the one that was just discussed of a little pathway across the spit, I was thinking maybe a yellow brick road. You were seeing all the reclaimed rubbish that's down there. A little whimsical. Oh God, what was my other thought? I wondered if we could involve the International Joint Commission on Lakes in maybe getting some funding or something. I don't know if they have any money to spend on improving our waterways, but we are shedding all this rubbish off our dock walls into the lake, and I guess it goes somewhere. So just a thought that maybe there's some funding somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Well, Jennifer Merrillees, thank you a billion. Wish I had $1 billion to give you, It's great. I'm really thrilled. I'm sorry about the extra work and the challenges, Merrillees. I'm sorry about that, but I'm actually thrilled that the Waterfront Secretariat is starting to actually embrace the entire damn waterfront from, I know it's baby steps and you need to staff up. I get it. But we really do need somebody looking over, from Etobicoke Creek to the Rouge River, right? We need that. Especially as, if any of us stay alive long enough, especially as one day you'll be able to walk and as well as hopefully paddle the length of it, right? So that's really quite exciting. I know that my 30-year-old son was 4 when we first started having community conversations before Waterfront Toronto was a twinkling in anyone's eyes about what is now, Courttown Common in the West Don Lands. And he was pretty much almost finished high school by the time it opened. But it happened.
Yeah.
So there you go. Okay, thanks very much. Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. We'll be back at you soon to up.